So I learned about 20 minutes ago. Well, no, about an hour ago, that I was going to actually help facilitate the questions. So we're starting a little bit late, and you'll have to bear with me as I hold up the questions because we're now using my laptop. I know where to go. Not a problem. So everyone online, we are about to kick off. I just want to say thank you for the four of you for participating. Some of these conversations I think will happen today come from conversations that a number of organizations have been having over this year. A lot of it around, again, what are we doing with the architecture? So we're gonna do both on the, we're gonna try to stay away from the absolute granular and more to the questions at hand. And I'm going to start in 1 second. I'm sorry, people. Okay, I've got the questions. So actually, first off, I think we should just introduce ourselves quickly. I'm Christopher Spalding, Secretary of the OLF, and I also work in product at EBSCO.
I'm Tom Kramer from Stanford University, where I'm an Associate University Librarian for Digital Library Systems and Services.
Vince Burrow, Enterprise Architect in EBSCO and Architect on FOLIO project for 8 years now. I'm Todd Olson. I'm on the Technical Council, have activity in reporting and SysOps, and I'm at the University of Chicago, where I manage the Integrated Library Systems Group. Samuel Water, AO of IT Open Scholarship at Cornell University, and co-chair of the university.
I think Vince just did 8 years. Yeah. Wow. Many of us have been here for a very long time.
I realized that when I was preparing one of these presentations, I was trying to figure out how long it was, and I was stunned that it really is 8 years ago that this thing started.
So I guess in FOLIO years, that would be about 25, 30. Okay, so just to start things off, much of the conversations on the architecture that we've been looking at really started around this idea that maybe where we are today with code base today and how the code base is organized, we've really had reached a plateau. And what do you all think the next phase is around that plateau and where we move forward?
Right. So I was maybe the comments that was going to be, but the notion is that early on when the project started, that 8 years ago, we had sort of a concerted effort, a focused effort in the community to provide accelerated development towards this goal of having a minimal functional set of features that would allow us to launch the library, a library to this project. And we achieved that. And since then, we have gotten several libraries now that use FOLIO on a daily basis. It's deployed throughout the world. And so that's sort of why I pictured that we've plateaued. So we've reached that point where now it's working, and we have libraries working with it and so forth. But I also have the sense that we are approaching a point where we now have additional things that we have to work on, and hopefully that'll foster sort of a concerted effort once again to focus on those things and getting them out there. Part of it is really to do with scale, because we have large scale functionality that's coming to bear on us with consortia that are adopting FOLIO, with additional requirements there. We have the Library of Congress, which is the biggest library in the world, that also has not only scale issues to be dealt with in FOLIO, but also the complexities of the workflows and reaching into areas that FOLIO has not yet addressed. So I do think those are the drivers.
Could you speak closer to the mic? I'm seeing the comments through the.
Sorry. Is that better? Okay. I don't like the echo.
Vince, I think, has given a nice characterization, even if you couldn't hear it. For me, from my perspective, the two big priorities are performance related to scale. We're going live at Stanford right now. This is the number one concern. This was the thing that was almost the blocker, and there's wood around here somewhere that I'll knock on. The other area that I think we really need to do is make FOLIO easier to develop on, to release, to test. Right now, the lift that is required and the size of the team that's required is just too much, and I think it's stymieing some of the community development and some of the innovation.
So, adding on to that, I think that the things we've been talking about also focus on making FOLIO a more an easier system to run. Giving it a little bit, bringing together some components to give it a little bit lighter footprint, and hopefully provide more visibility into the running system. Yeah, help manage that complexity.
So, agreeing with what's been said before, but I think I want to pick apart the notion of plateau just for a moment. So I think in the sense of many ordinary libraries up to the scales of Stanford, for example, we've essentially reached a feature plateau. FOLIO has what's required to run these libraries. Now, consortia are pushing that envelope a little bit to say more is required. LC has its own particular needs, and especially with the bib frame, introduces new features. So there's nonetheless, as has been mentioned, the need to improve the performance and the sustainability of the platform. You know, everyone's been rushing for features for years, and there's a need for sort of retooling, addressing technical debt. But then there's the what's next. And I think one of the things we as a community need to think about is what are the things that's really going to excite use of FOLIO for the new things beyond what the traditional iOS has done and what was necessary for us to migrate. So that's a sort of two forks beyond the plateau.
Your note about also what's exciting towards the future and coming off of the plenary this morning. Tom asked a question about, you know, where do we see BibFrame, linked data, and what does FOLIO have to offer to that, or what does BibFrame and linked data have to offer to FOLIO? And so maybe we can start there.
I can start that. Just talk louder now. So yeah, this is actually very exciting, and I've been involved with that work for the BibFrame effort driven by Congress, and also this additional work that we have to do to evolve the architecture and grow the scale. And for the most part, they were initially kind of viewed as independent tracks, independent trajectories. And as I came to look at some of the problems, I realized that there was definitely the need for a push null between the two to have. And it turns out that if we'd had BibFrame already in place, some of the problems that need to be addressed by scale could have been resolved. So I think in addition to just simply how you do cataloging and such things, the notion of having a data graph and what it offers you in terms of being able to provide answers, provide additional features to FOLIO in other areas is critical. For example, one of the things that's often come up in FOLIO is just how tightly coupled the pieces are. And this is a challenge in itself to decouple those and remove those dependencies. And in some ways, having a data graph and being able to tap into it as some sort of a link resolver can probably address some of those issues. There was a question that was asked yesterday with regard to how do we turn FOLIO not just into a language specific or localization specific platform, but how do we support multiple localizations or multiple languages at once in the platform? And it occurred to me at the time that data graphs can offer kind of that option. In other words, we can link alternative language versions of descriptions and things using the data graph. You know, we can attach things to the node. So there are many things I think that we've yet to discover, but having that sort of approach would be very useful for FOLIO.
So as I said in the previous presentation, it's very exciting that FOLIO is moving to support BitFrame. I have two thoughts around this. One is this is the realization of the vision of multiple source record types. I guess there was one comment that maybe everything would move to the data graph as the lingua franca and be converted. I'm a little skeptical about that actually. I like the first step of generalizing to support multiple types, so I think that would actually be a good step for the future. The second thought was really based on the question I asked at the last session. To truly realize the value of linked data, we have to avoid creating an ecosystem where we are copying and creating independent versions of a yet more complex bibliographic format. So what I would like to see is some discussion around the infrastructure needed to have shared reference to other institutions' copies. Same with, for instance, the Library of Congress is a good starting point because they're a pretty solid block to build on. And what's needed to do that? Do we just have the reference? Do we have a cache copy that's updated? How do we work with that? How does that pass through a discovery system? Those are really interesting questions to me.
So you're saying you don't want to keep on copying, just copies and copies and more copies.
Well, I think my points have already been made, which have a lot. In part, that would be really being able to push localization in a way that we haven't been able to before. In those places where data in the system, and not just labels in the interface, but data in the system need to be multilingual in some contexts. And then the other thing does go to linked data and the need for managing references and managing those triples, because we will likely all be in the position of minting triples and curating triples. There's just, we all have local collections, we all have particular areas where we are probably the authority for making truth statements. We need to be able to share those truth statements, but we don't want to be we don't want to be doing the equivalent of shipping around tapes of authority records. So how do we manage that? And I think there's probably some prior work that can give some inspiration, like how's domain management, the domain name system work? How does the planetary file system work? But yeah, it's going to have its own particular wrinkles.
Whether we like it or not, it's exciting that FOLIO is now is the lead car in the pioneer train into linked data with ILSs because of the innovations I've seen, because Library of Congress adoption and the contract, because of EBSCO's investments and work. I also happen to actually think that linked data is a good direction to go. The thing I've noticed about doing linked data for about a dozen years now is it rarely turns out the way people expect it. And I really like what Matt Miller said is we just need to do things and learn from it. I think every time someone has made a grand vision and grand prediction about this is what linked data is going to be, and here's a 10-step plan that's going to take 10 years, they're usually off by 9 steps in 12 years. So I think this is a really good match for this community to try to figure out, do a little bit of experimentation, get a lot of discussion, get community buy-in, because it's actually not that every time things go off, in my experience, it's not because the technology hasn't been able to scale, because we haven't figured out how to copy the data. It's because people say, well, I can't have other people edit my records because they're my records. So it's kind of it's the rules process and the norms process. We did FOLIO is cool, right? We had at Stanford with Cornell and others, we've developed Sinopia as an open source linked data editor, cataloging editor. It's fantastic. We wanted to actually see, well, how will this work with the ILS that we're going to this week? We did a project to integrate the two called Sonolio. It works, and it's open, and there is already a linked data editor that people can plug into Folio through just a lightweight integration. I think that type of activity, we're going to see a real efflorescence of linked data tooling, and this community is in a great position to foster that, to guide that, to resource that, to inform how it gets developed. So I think the answer is we should be doing a lot more experimentation, and we should be starting yesterday, which fortunately we already did.
Yeah, and I want to add something on to the build on Simeon was saying earlier. we are at it relates to the previous question about the plateau and where we ramp up to next. So we made 2 points that are very interesting. One is the ability to use the data graph and what have you as a multi-source of to support multiple sources at once. In other words, to eventually maybe replace the inventory that we have, support multiple formats in and out of the Folio platform. And that is a clear example of a direction we may want to go in terms of ramping up to the next level. But also interestingly was the comment about sharing different representations of these graphs within disparate folios. And it also relates to the trajectory that we have to be on for Folio as a platform, namely that Folio initially was very much contained to the experience of a single institution within the tenant. We're now at a point where we are going to be supporting consortia. In other words, we've expanded out beyond the tenant into a larger scope where we have multiple tenants that can now interact with Folio, and that's being driven by the needs of consortia. Similarly, when we get to this linked data phase, if we want to have sharing of the linked data, then it's going to drive yet more innovation, which is the ability to share things between Folio installations. So we've gone from tenant to multi-tenant to installation, and that'll be an exciting phase. We'll have the Folio universe at that point.
Holding a lab and hearing one's voice is definitely very bizarre. So on that point, and much of the conversations around the architecture in the last couple of days, we a year ago in Hamburg were talking about some of these concepts, especially around application formalization, platform formalization, next steps there, and it's been about a year. How do we keep the momentum of the conversations that are happening here today at WOLFcon this year and leading up to it over this past 6 months? How do we keep that momentum going, the engagement, the focus?
Wait, that was my question. I want the answer. I think this may sound weaselly. I think even asking that question should be helpful. I think we've got to what Vince has called the plateau. I think we need to deliberately shape how we want to move forward. Maybe it's through the existing council infrastructures and the SIGs, but maybe it's not. We should figure out how well that has worked, what we want to do, and sit down and get it done.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that part of the challenge also is how do we maintain momentum, because as we keep developing these things and significant changes to the architecture and new areas that we expand into, we have to be cautious not to stop all of the other work, because as Simeon pointed out, sure, we're at a plateau, but there's still some work to be done. There's some technical debt, there are some features that are to be completed. So we're going to have to balance the two efforts, and it may well be that these things need to be put on tracks that can support an accelerated growth without necessarily a lot of hindrance in moving forward, while at the same time having maybe a slower track and better control over the technical debt side of things.
And along those lines, with the proposal, the discussion of the application formalization included a lot of steps, but it does seem like there are some early steps that could be taken, that someone could claim responsibility for and implement to get us, get a milestone down that road that would actually have not only serve the purpose of moving things forward, but actually produce some benefit. I think that that would be one way to keep that going and then create some positive momentum.
So depending on how you want to define it, application formalism is part of addressing technical debt. The original folio vision didn't have lockstep flower releases forever. It had an ecosystem with a functioning product with optional additional apps from, as Jen would say, the application library, not store. And I think, to echo Vince, we need to allocate some portion of our effort to addressing these boring infrastructural things that give no one a new feature. And we need to accept that as a community. And it's a significant amount of effort. I don't know what it should be. Maybe it's a third. Who knows? But we need to think about that and we need to allocate for that, because otherwise at some point the addition of new features will grind to a halt, because we will have not got the testing to a place where we can do things safely. We will have built ourselves into corners where we can't add the new feature. We will build ourselves into performance holes that we can't get out of. So the way to move this forward is greater community understanding of the importance of this part of the track, which generates no new features.
Can I go off script? Can I go, Rick? Absolutely. Absolutely.
So this is, I think, the third or the fourth presentation from this, just WOLFcon on application formalization to do, and maybe, you probably came to this because you were interested, though maybe this is your first time. How many people think this is a solid concept and bears going forward with? I see one jazz hands in the audience with maybe, I'm not so sure. Does anyone have like significant doubts? All right. What can we do? I don't know if anyone is, no one is saying anything online. What can we do if we have strong, if not unanimous consensus that this is a good direction? How can we just get it done without talking it to death for another 6 months? Does anyone have an idea or a proposal, including fellow panelists or moderator?
Next year, you underlining the urgency here. How urgent to the community is this? And what are steps forward?
Well, we don't have to make everything hard. I mean, we can. We are a community of librarians, and we're good at that. But maybe we could also make it easier and just do it.
Oh yeah, I can get running.
I was gonna say is that, I know one of the potential pitfalls that we've seen over the last couple of days is related to talking, and it's this issue around changing the approval process for modules, and like this keeps coming up, like how is this gonna change the product council process potentially for the flowers and that sort of thing? So proactively heading that off at the pass and like getting them talking about that so that they're like prepped for change would probably help with things along.
Other comments?
Do you want to say something? No.
Just we can do whatever we want because we made the rules and we can update the rules. So I just an attentive process and a deliberate one, as Jen's pointing out. Maybe we can just do it.
Yeah, maybe we can just do it. And that's a good point, that we make the rules, we can change them. And when we reach a plateau and we have a new phase of accelerated development, that may be the time to examine the rules and say, well, we can adjust them this way or that way to help the process move on.
So I'm just curious, as a moderator here, what does just do it mean? Because part of that is coming out of the questions coming out of conversation I had yesterday about data import. And when a solution was looked for data import, there was a point where EBSCO just did it, worked from the back end and took care of code commits and moved us forward. I'm curious. I also got dinged for that, saying that was probably not the best way of moving forward. When we say just do it, what does just do it mean? Is it around yes, the community agrees with this, we don't need to talk it to death, we've raised our hands, and we should start planning all of our dev around this? Or is it, that's a pause with a question mark.
So at the end of the day, to do anything requires the people who have control of resources to allocate time to it. EBSCO controls approximately 3/4 of the resources of development in FOLIO. So probably, for example, you would be a large part of it. I think one of the key things to doing that in a way that brings the community along is to be very plain about what's happening. So we've had, for example, business papers circulated with ideas. We've aired that at this forum and others. Perhaps there's understanding of buy-in for the concept. So obviously the concept has to be developed to plan should be shared, and just implement should be shared. And that's not necessarily, asking for a complex review process that slows this down to 5 years. But I think one of the things is just, if in doubt, over communicate what's going on so that people are as aware as possible of, how it's coming and not surprised.
I can say that the SysOps has been looking at the formalization paper, and the comments have been quite positive. So, I mean, to my mind, that's, seems like, getting in front of it and not being a surprise is probably working in this case. And there's certainly a lot of people running their own systems are feeling pressure in this area, so there's a fair amount of enthusiasm about that. I think then the thing becomes to say something about, we're going to put some effort into this in this time frame. Sort of an expectation setting.
Suppose I have to comment. But it's true that there are oftentimes constraints on when things happen to address critical issues, and there are situations where there are conflicting constraints, and sometimes it may be that there is not enough time to get things through the processes that we have in FOLIO. And yet there is an urgent demand to get something fixed right away, because either it is affecting a large number of institutions that are adopting and making use of FOLIO, or maybe it's something that is part of a planned project that has fixed milestones that need to deliver something to a prospect that, in a short amount of time. So it's a balancing act, and you have to sometimes, it's water flows around the obstacles, and that's kind of what sometimes needs to happen. But in the end, right, there is control within the FOLIO project. And even if any group creates something that is, perhaps done on a fast track on the outside, there is still the choice to be made in the project side, whether or not to accept those, and whether to take them and do something different with them, or just reject them altogether. So it's imperative, I think, that any organization or group that provides something to FOLIO, keep in mind that in the end, it should really benefit the project as a whole in order to be accepted by the project.
A couple of things there. I'm going to jump in with a quick response. So I'd say Mark and Anya. it feels to me, we have a lot of very smart and very effective people in the local institutional context in this project. If we decided that this was a priority for strategic reasons, for technical debt reasons, for operational reasons, I think we could do it. Jen, I love what you said. It's like, well, there's a product council tie-in there. Okay, well, how do we figure out what that product council tie-in is and how do we manage that? It may have been me who dinged Christopher about not the solution to data import, but the process. If we in the community set up such cumbersome and bureaucratic and friction-filled processes to address what are clearly in everyone's best interests, and it's easier for an individual or an institution to work outside the process and come back in, then we've not set up a very good community process. And what I would hate to see is for an institution that might control 75% of the development resources to go figure it out and then come back in and say, well, we figured out, we think this is the problem, we think this is the solution, and what do you all think? Because I think we can do better. If we reduce kind of the friction and we start steering towards the outcome instead of identifying reasons things could go wrong. I think we spend too much time playing to our fears rather than to our hopes. I think Mark had his hand up first.
I didn't name names.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments. One is, it was great to see a show of hands, people in favor of moving forward with this, and I think that calls for a group hug, right? With everybody. Another is, I don't know how many people have read the book by Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And one of the things he underscores is at the bottom of everything is trust. I think if we trust each other in the best intentions, and that even if somebody goes off and does something and then brings it back to the community for their review, it's done with the best intentions. Okay, and that may be a way to push things forward by getting around endless process of reviews and comments and so on. And another comment I wanted to make is I think we should follow one of the agile principles, and that is iterate over and over, and with every iteration make improvements. We're not going to get it right the first time, but the thing is, let's get it out in the open as quickly as we can and make mistakes, but then we'll make improvements as well. And again, it's all with the best intention.
Did anyone want to comment back to Mark before I? Okay. Mine's on transparency and what the definition or what the wanted would be in the community. Like there are times where, I propose something to my team, I'll write it all up and then ask for edits and comments because I feel that it's easier to be critiqued and change rather than it is to create something as a group. But at the same time, there are times when I want to have a collaborative process. So I'm just wondering if we're saying what we need is transparency, at what point in the process do we want transparency? At the idea stage, at the, hey, help me review this, or hey, there's something, we want to commit, to. So I'm just wondering, as a community, what do we mean when we say transparency?
It's a tough problem to communicate effectively, in part because we're a big and complex project with so many things going on that you can actually obfuscate by sharing every detail. So I think transparency has to be a nuanced thing. And I think one of the things that's really important is to be transparent about the interactions you're hoping for with something that's shared. So there's a choice of sharing at the right granularity. And then there's this is what we're doing. I'm looking for comments. I'm looking for something else. And I think it's both sharing and helping set expectations for what is going to go on with that. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I would echo that, especially, the part about setting expectations. I think one of the places where we can run into some, friction is when expectations suddenly change. And so that is a difficult part of communication, sort of understanding what you're trying to put out there and how that meshes with expectations out there in the community, which may not be uniform. So this is also a process of coming to a kind of common expectation. Yeah, not a simple, no checklist.
Think on that, but I would agree that transparency is very important, but there's a key point I think that Anya raised, which was when is it best to introduce transparency? Because transparency usually has to do with introducing change, and as been pointed out several times, people fear change, and their initial reaction will be to resist it and put up barriers. So I think there's a right time to become transparent, maybe become transparent gradually, to the point where the expectation can be set once there is a full appreciation and understanding of what the change will bring. So sometimes that's fine to do that at the idea and the concept level because it's a simple concept. But sometimes there may be, a very complicated concept from the start. Like I guess BibFrame as an example of that, and the benefits or advantages of something like that may not always be clear. So you have to tailor when to communicate, how much to communicate, depending on what it is you're communicating for transparency purposes.
I agree with the comments that have come before. I think part of what we need is to reset or revisit what our expectations for working with each other and what the team structures are. And I don't think there's a single right answer as long as everyone agrees this is the way we should be doing it. There was, with the Apache Software Foundation, if you've been part of this, is getting a little aged now, but the Apache way was something that they lived and breathed by and everyone could cite, and it was an important part of becoming the project. I feel like FOLIO never quite achieved that. As someone who came in only 3 years ago, so not here for 8 years, and it feels like there's not an agreement or a consensus on the way things should work. And that's, if we could just get the agreement, then everything would be better.
I have a comment to several points to the topics. I'd rather focus on the dreaming rather than the fear. The comment you mentioned, Jen, about getting it across maybe product council, and then the just getting it done. I'm probably gonna just say an example with some rhetorical questions to not answer now, but I'm hoping maybe people can then comment. I'm thinking, okay, when it's a just get it done, I think if people have to get it done at some point, it's programming. I'm going to use the example of the dev team I work closest with so far, Vega, in the circulation area. Like essentially, so we're in Poppy at the moment, we're programming because Poppy has been postponed. We have postponed also the time where we have to define what will get done in Quisnelia and what needs to get refined. Quisnelia might have been released in end of the year, now it's next year. If the decision is indeed like, this is important. What do we drop? How much? Do we do everything except the LOC1 features? Or not at all? If it's just the LOC, do we drop all other features that other customers are actually, or other libraries are waiting for? And this is why it's, I think, beyond just the product council. A good example of Stanford, right? Do we say that even your performance, you can't check anything out because the cert rules don't load? Do we also drop that until everything has been done? And I don't have the answer, I don't know, but I think this will be part of the transparency as well as to, and it's my first fear at this point, and I'm hoping that I'm fearing too much, that it's not just about the discussions in the councils, but it is every institution places different value on some of the features they're waiting for. And I also, as a peer, I don't know how to either justify, like, how long do we wait for new features at all? How long do we pause for this work? Even ignoring the side of, I don't know, like, even if we say bigger, you do this now, do they have the skills and all the other things? Maybe the just getting it done is other teams in a different fashion. I don't know.
So I would just like to acknowledge a repeated dynamic and how it affects views here. When one is prepping to go live, one is laser focused on getting the must-have features, and that trumps everything. Once one has gone live, then typically one is interested in stability, reliability, performance. So I would like to acknowledge that my views are tempered by that. We went live, we are operating. So I've now switched into that mode where these things have become of greater importance. So I'm here advocating for, let's put more effort into doing those things. If you're LC, you got the hit list of features you need to go live. And that's a dynamic that sort of continues throughout the organization. I look forward to Stanford switching soon into the stability mode. I don't have an answer to that question, but it's just institutions will sit in different places on that spectrum.
What mode are you in?
We are in both wanting, we're really wanting stability and bug fixes. Like for us, the main pain point is data import. And that's where we are. But we also see a lot of, we see some infrastructure things that need attention. So the things that are on this list. I think one of the things about transparency or about change management is it goes back to setting expectations, and perhaps some of that is understanding how decisions are being made in context. I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, well, we're going to have, this is going to be delivered this time, and that's been delayed. But then some insight into why, what are the competing pressures? So I think people sometimes understand that there are competing pressures. And that can be useful.
So in response to that rhetorical question about how do we prioritize and figure out within the development cycle of the FOLIO project what gets done in a particular release or not, it's important to remember that FOLIO is not just a single organization that is like a commercial organization that has a fixed number of things they can do. It is an open community, so there are many ways to get things done. It's not just a matter of having it on the official roadmap and having the official teams that are assigned to the FOLIO project work on them. Any organization can come to the project and pick up something or even introduce something that they've done. So there's always that, I guess it goes to the just do it aspect to some extent as well, but we've seen that in the project, and we've seen, I mentioned this before, but there's a rewrite of the calendar app that came into the project because an organization said, well, this just isn't working for us. So we have here, we're going to rewrite this. And it was brought in as a whole package. It didn't have to go through some prioritization within the FOLIO organization because it went around that and delivered something that worked, and it was well received and accepted. And I actually think we need to encourage, that kind of participation as well. And I don't want to have a separate podium speech here, but, and then, you know, this gets to the whole app store and how we can encourage these organizations to participate more easily.
We have library. You have to return your application, it's over there. So I'll just riff off of that. This is totally also off script. Is one of the beautiful parts about FOLIO is that it is a community project. It is not, it is organic and people respond. Vega team's pretty awesome. Stanford had some serious, we were in June planning to go live. Critical Service Patch 2, I think, came out and our cert times just tanked. It was a blocker. We could not go live because our access services people would not wait 10 seconds per circ. And Vega team stepped in and they helped out. We worked it from our end too. It's still a little bit slow, but it was good enough that we could go live. And if you have to plan out when you're going to get bugs 2 years in advance to get commitment of resources, that would not have been awesome. Like Stanford, Alexis was up on the podium last night at the reception, just talking about how wonderful and flexible people at Stanford have been. But we did it because when we came into the project 3 years ago, we were talking to EBSCO, we were talking to Index Data, we were talking to colleagues at Cornell and Texas A&M, and it was very impressive about how the community was working together. We've found common cause with our colleagues in Germany that there is, we shouldn't overplan or overthink as we move forward. So that's not an answer to anything, but thank you, Vega, because it's pretty cool.
That was a great start of the conversation. Thank you. Are there other questions? We're getting to the end of the session. Yes, Kirsten.
I was thinking about doing one thing and don't leave the other, because just get things done, pick up an app, do, or just develop an app is one thing and just do it. But in implementing an informational process to the councils to get them informed, what we just did with the roadmap assembly, that people know what others are doing. That's not slowing down those people who want to get things done, but it is exactly those way to transparency we just talked about. So maybe we don't need to be radical, but inclusional, that's an English word.
Just wanted to add to what was said before about just getting things done, which is great. But I think we also need to think, and maybe it goes back to expectations and transparency, maybe it leads to governance. Because when somebody develops a solution, well, and it becomes available, well, somebody has to be around to continue evolving that solution. Somebody has to be around to fix the bugs, issues. And so there are certain obligations that are attached to someone contributing this solution to the community.
That's an old Russian saying, right? Could you read it? So there's some questions in Slack, not in the meeting chat.
Is there a brief summary of how the FOLIO platform ideas will change development implementation practices? That's a question in Slack, maybe it could be answered in Slack. And then how would bounded context be defined operationally within the system? So I just want to draw your attention. There's quite a few different questions. There's about 2 pages of a phone screen.
So we'll follow up after the session, since we have 3 minutes left or 2 minutes left. So maybe from each of you, what you see this coming year as the Get It Done roadmap session comes to an end. So just a sentence. Absolutely.
I think our discussion just brought things full circle in the sense that one of our key needs is to make development easier. And this is going to be an incredibly run-on sentence, which follows on from my great experience at the Enabling Developers session yesterday. If we can make the architecture simpler and the element of course graining and better componentization to avoid other FOLIO terms of applications, I think that's a good step on the way to enabling more people to contribute.
And then if we move that to the processes that we use, there's a difference between fixing something here and now and addressing that kind of immediate, clearly defined need from changing some of the processes that we use, whether that's a systemic change in how we manage the architecture, or whether that's a change in how we make decisions as a project to be a little more nimble. So starting to sort that out, I think.
I was just thinking that sometimes someone is asked a question and we need some time to think to stall. So you'll say, that was a great question. And I'm just realizing maybe one says, that was a terrible question. And get more time to think about things. But I seriously though, I think the next year is going to be focused on a fair amount of cleanup. We're going to have to address technical debt. There's just no way that we can sustain some of the stuff that's been done. And that will include putting the house in order, as it were, by formalizations like applications and platforms, but also in that process, identifying exactly where the key pieces are in technical debt as we start to look at those. And not all things are equal. And we'll identify the ones that give us the most benefit if we fix those first. And then we can, at the same time, move ahead with these new ideas that we have.
So first, just a comment, this is the touchiest, feeliest architecture session I've ever been a part of, which I appreciate. I may be slightly guilty. I'll build on what Todd said, is I think if we're moving forward into the next year, if we think about what we want to achieve and do it deliberately instead of just carrying along the baggage and the structure that we've had, that would serve us all well and would let us go faster. And maybe I'll update my let's just do it to let's just do it together, because I don't think we want to just do it to get to the end. Because unless we're doing it together, it's not going to be sustainable. We're going to get code dumped. People are going to get frustrated, are going to walk away. But I still think we can just do it together.
So I need everyone to give themselves a nice big hug for attending today's session. And thank you all for your comments in the panel. And great.